Did that by accident. Hello, I believe we're now live. Hi everyone. Yeah, welcome to another live stream. Still working from home, but hopefully it won't be too long before we can start doing these streams in the office again. But for now we're still here. But yeah, in this live stream we're going to be taking a look at MIDI effects with Doubler and how you can use MIDI effects to expand what Doubler is capable of. As always as well, I'll be watching the chat, so if you've got any questions, feel free, and I'll try and make sure I get all of them. But yeah, I guess we may as well just dive straight in. I guess a brief explanation first when we're talking about MIDI effects. So like, what are MIDI effects? So very basically, they're something that takes incoming MIDI information and then changes it some way before it reaches your instrument. So a very common example of that is an arpeggiator, in which it takes in the MIDI input, and yeah, the output you get is a lot different. So today I'll be using Ableton to go through some of these MIDI effects, because I think Ableton works really well with MIDI effects grouping. It just handles MIDI information in a really fun way. But a lot of the stuff I'll be talking about will be translatable to other DAWs. The processes might be slightly different, but hopefully the ideas there are still, might be some inspiring ideas on how you can use MIDI effects with Doubler. So let me change my screen and bring Ableton up. There we go. As always, if the audio is weird, if I'm too quiet, if Ableton is too loud, let me know and I'll try and adjust it. Let me bring this up, make this smaller. Yeah, so I guess we'll dive straight in. So I'm going to do MIDI effects with triggers as well as MIDI effects with pitch. And yeah, like I said, if you've got any questions along the way, I'll try keep an eye. If I get too absorbed into Ableton, you might need to just spam the chat a couple of times and I'll pick it up eventually. But yeah, let's start. So I've got just a few kits and stuff that I've started it with here. So let's start with triggers. So this is kind of presuming that, you know, we're at the point with Doubler where we've got our triggers down, we've got our pitch, and we're fine with using both of those. But we want to kind of expand what we do. So I've got these triggers here. Let me turn that up or down a little bit. So yeah, I've got my basic triggers and I can make some beats. Oh, not if my Doubler mic disconnects. What have I done? Let me plug that back in. My work from home desk is such a mess of cables. Put this in here. Classic live stream. There we go. No. Oh no, what have I just done to the cable here? Give me a second. There we go. Alright. This is fun, isn't it? Right, let me move this around. Let me try a different cable. I've got such a slew of different things going on here. 1 second. Well, the joys of doing stuff live. Give me a couple minutes and then let me sort this out. Yeah, it is VTuber stuff, you're right. What happens is, it's this classic thing of you spend ages getting everything set up and you test it and you're all good to go, and then as soon as you hit that live button, technology decides that it's not having any of it, and it's just gonna peace out and leave me to deal with this. Unplug this. worst case scenario, I do have another MIDI cable. Let me try this USB. Let's see if this one works better. There we go. I think we're back. I think we're good. Right, where was I? Yeah, so we've got our kit and we've got our triggers here. So if, like me though, you're not a particularly proficient beatboxer, your ideas can sometimes be a little bit restricted based on your voice. So what we can do is use MIDI effects to kind of make some little more intricacies and still do it live in real time and not have to edit the MIDI afterwards. So a really common one that we want to do is, say if we've got our hats here, they're really hard to do in really fast succession, so like a triplets or something. So we can use MIDI effects to input this triplet on this hi-hat while still controlling the other drums. So what I mean by that is, in Ableton, we can go to our MIDI effects and we can use an arpeggiator, and it's just going to be just on the hi-hat. So if I place it here before the sample, all the other ones are still the same, but here now I'll have an arpeggiator which will affect the rate of my hi-hat. So if I set this to cool. So it's very annoying there, and it's also constant. So, but we want to have that speed, and we want to have that in every now and then. So, but the problem is that if you have a hold function, when you input a note using doubler in here, then the notes are very short because they're just that initial beat. So let me show you what I mean. If I just record, they're only this long, so they can't hold that arpeggiated note for particularly long. So what we want to do is use a note length effect here. So in MIDI effects here, note length, and drag this before the arpeggiator, and here we can change the length of that note that's coming in, and then that will go into the arpeggiator and we can make that as long as we want, that little run. So if I turn hold off, sorry, so if we up the length, cool. So then we've got that little which I can just trigger with that initial. So I can now do little hi-hat runs in between my other normal beatboxing. Which is, and you can obviously just change the speeds and lengths to whatever you want. So this would be a really fast one. Let's lower the length. So that's just a stock Ableton kit, so it doesn't sound particularly great. But the principle there is that what you're doing is starting to change the intricate kind of little fills and stuff in between, but still doing it in real time. So that applies to anything as well. You can do it with, say, a snare roll or something like that. And just use something like note length to change the input note. So let me just show you how that's different as well. This will be recorded as well. So if I set the length really long, so you saw when I first recorded it was just that initial beat, but now, oh, maybe it doesn't record it, maybe that's me being wrong. But either way, it goes through that and then feeds it and says, how does double identify the sounds? Sorry, I'm just reading chat here. How does double identify the sounds is at the tom or frequency based. So what doubler does very basically is that you teach it an audio source. So if my hi-hat, I repeat that sound a few times. Doubler then we have like machine learning algorithms, and what we do is it learns that sound and applies it to a MIDI note. So whenever it hears it, it associates that sound with the MIDI note and spits it out. I'm not the best person for the real technical details about that thing, but what it's listening for is the initial transient. So that's why we always say short and sharp sounds work the best with doubler, because it's listening for that right at the beginning, and then it's right, okay, now I'm going to stick out this note or whatever. That's very layman's terms. David, I saw, was in the chat earlier. He might be able to give a little bit more info on how it works, but without revealing our secrets. But yeah, so that's one little tip, is that you can use MIDI effects like that to input different rhythms in drum beats whilst you're doing it. So that's one kind of way in terms of triggers that you can use MIDI effects. So another way we'll look at, which is slightly more in-depth, is chopping up samples and how you can use triggers for live sample control. So for this, I've got a sample here, which is an almond break. So if I just play this, so classic almond break. And what I want to do now is I want to use my triggers to cut this up and do something quite cool with it live. And obviously it's the almond break, so get some jungly rhythms going on. So I'm first going to just set the BPM to 160. So one of the things we're doing here, though, is not thinking about triggers as associating them with sounds, for example, being a kick, being a hi-hat, whatever. We're thinking about these triggers here as pads, the same as it would be in like an MPC or something like that. We're treating our triggers now as launch pads, and we're kind of opening up the possibilities of what we can do, because it can be restricted if you only think about triggers and beatboxing as, yeah, associating them with the actual sounds you hear back. So this jungle tip is something I picked up from Ned Rush. If you don't know him, he's like an Ableton guru, does really fun and cool videos on Ableton stuff, so go check him out. But this is one of his jungle videos that I've taken, and I'll basically just do that through the lens of doubler rather than launch pads. So we're going to grab a simpler, so where is our simpler? Into there, and then we're going to stick our almond loop in. And I'm going to set this to one shot, and let's change this. We also want to warp it, so repitch. I want to warp this, set that as a bar, and what this does is basically means that so that's kind of the speed we want, that's the loop, but basically if I move the tempo, it will just warp with it and stage with what it wants. So that's what we want. I'm going to turn velocity off here. So the reason for that being that I'm no longer thinking about this as drum loops, drum beats, sorry. We're now using it as kind of like launchpad stuff, so I don't want velocity, I just want everything straight the same. So we're going to group this to a drum rack, and then we have this first sample, so this first loop that we made. So that's the first loop we've got, which is on our C1, so that's our first trigger. And now what we can do is if we copy that across, and then we pick a different section of the loop. So say we want this one. And now we've got a little bit different bit of the sample. But what you hear there is that they start to overlap. So what we want to do is chokes, which is choke groups. So if we go open this up and go to the in and outs, we can set chokes. So this means what a choke is basically this works. So when they're in the same group, it will cut the other sample off and will just play straight away afterwards. So the same, how MPC used to work, it's exactly that, in that I can now play the different ones and they'll all be in time and cut off. So yeah, let's carry on with that. If I copy them, they'll still be in the same choke group, and then we'll basically just pick a different section. So from that one, we'll have that part of the almond break, and for this last one, we'll have the crash. This one, my hi-hat is on F sharp 1, so I drag this here. So yeah, I mean, I can use my triggers using this to start chopping up samples and breaks live. So if I was playing something else, I could use my voice to do this with samples. So one of the most difficult things though here is that when I'm doing that with my voice, because I'm not playing straight beats, I'm playing sections of samples that have their own timing. It's really difficult to keep your own, your like timing right with other tracks or BPM stuff. So what we can actually do is use MIDI effects here to quantize what we're doing live in a weird way, kind of live quantization, if you like, to make sure it's staying in time with the project that we're in. So we can do this through note length again here, set the mode to sync, and we'll put this to an 1/8. Get an arpeggiator after that, and we'll put it to chord trigger mode and also have it on an 1/8. And now as the MIDI information goes in, it's getting filtered by these two things, and before it gets spat out, it's going to be in time. So now, although it will be slightly different to what I'm beatboxing, I know now that I can just have fun playing these samples using my triggers if I was doing something else, and it will be yeah, relatively in time. And play different samples. So one thing also that we can do with that in the same way, if I've got, you might need headphones to hear this one. So this is just a long sub. So if I want to stick something like that on as well, I can duplicate this. I'm going to get rid of these. I'm going to keep the same syncing and everything. I'm just going to drag another simpler into here and drop in our kick, our sub, sorry. Same thing, I'm going to copy these, but now I can also change. Let me put these all on one shot again. Oh, neowave music. I want to play with my voice as a wind instrument with free pitch and open with ooh and ah without mistakes. Sure, after this, so we'll go through some pitch stuff, but after this we can drag in some wind instruments and go through some of that kind of stuff. Sure. Let me just, where was I at with here? So go through here, and now I can transpose these just to change the note that's playing with this sub. Put this one as 3 or something. And if I have them both armed, they're using the same principle, and I can use the triggers. And then we've got some live jungle, if you like, using your voice. And you can expand that as well to whatever you want. You know, like I said, if you had like a drum break that you really liked and you were playing keys or whatever, you can kind of manipulate and have fun with samples using your voice, using that kind of technique. But yeah, that's another way that we can use that. So let me work our way through. So let's go a little bit to some of the pitch side of things. So I've got here, what have I got here? I've got this kind of, this is a drum. Yes, let me turn velocity on here again. So velocity sensitive. So I've just got like this is a big sounding orchestral kind of percussive thing. I'm not sure what you call it. Bass drum, it's in here, but it's in their orchestral loop. And that's fun to use because it's really velocity sensitive. So, and on this one I've got a choir. Ba, ba, ba. Oh, excuse me. Ba, 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 ba. So I've got a choir here, but if I wanted, so I've got something that's quite velocity sensitive there, and what I want is maybe just this choir to come through if I'm doing this at the same time when I hit bigger notes. So we can use a velocity gate here to basically make it so that whenever I sing it loud, it will come through, but if I'm not singing it particularly loud, then it's going to block it. So what I can do is bring in velocity here, and if I set the mode to gate, I can set the range here, so you can set the lowest amount of velocity that you have to hit for it to come through. So if I hit that at max on this choir now, if I've set this properly, if I go like ba 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 ba, so you see nothing's coming through. But if I then make a more louder ba 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 ba, so what I'm doing here is basically gating, removing any information that's below a certain velocity from coming through, and if it goes up to the highest one, then it lets it through and we hear it back. Dave, is that software separate to Vocalate? Yeah, so this is Ableton that I'm working in right now, but Doubler does actually come with Ableton Live Lite, which has lots of MIDI effects in it as well. So if you do buy Doubler, it comes with a copy of Ableton. It's got MIDI effects like in here, it's got arpeggiators, it's got velocity, it's got all this stuff. So you can do what we're doing now if you do buy Doubler Studio Kit. Yeah, so now if I have these both armed at the same time, so I've got different MIDI channels, I've got my choirs coming on channel 1 because that's pitch, and my drum here on channel 10, and now I can do these quiet bum 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 bum, and now if I hit the bigger louder notes I can get choirs to come through as well. Ba, 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 ba. That choir sounds not particularly great. I couldn't load up Mysteria, which we used before, because my computer can't handle that in streaming. But that's the principle of it anyway, is that you can gate things and get expressive by allowing only certain notes to come through. Yeah. So, what have we got here? The synth. Ba, 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 ba. Ba, 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 bum, bum. Ba, ba. So this is just a normal synth. Ba, 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 ba. So this synth also tracks just like length of note and everything as usual, so it's following my voice. But I want to get a bit more interesting than just, let me move that away from my voice, from then just straight up doing, yeah, just following my voice. And if I want to add, say, arpeggiated layers to this, but only I still want to control them live when I want them to and not just be a constant thing. So if we drag in an arpeggiator here and let's do a bit of swing. So if I hold a note now with an arpeggiator going on, then it will play, it will have a little gallop to it. Ba, 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 ba. But because I'm just doing a single note, what I could do is I could turn on the chords feature in Doubler, which would be a triad. Ba, 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 ba. So that's, I can get the arpeggiator running quite simply with that. But what I can do is, at the moment, Doubler's chord feature is just restricted to triads at the moment. You know, future versions and stuff will get more in depth, and there'll be stuff to come on that. But for now, we can use the chord feature, for example, in Ableton, and this allows you to set intervals that I want. So if I want +5, so that's 5 semitones away from that note that I'm singing, and a +7. Did I turn the chords off again? Yeah. Ba, ba, ba. So I've got these, but I don't want them all the time. So what I can do is group these up, and let's put this on hold, and then we can MIDI map what this group that we've just made here to a vowel. So if I press on here, we're going to MIDI map this to an E vowel, so that's come up here, CC21. So now this group that we've made will come on if I use an E vowel. So I can sing just basic staccato lines with my R's again. Ba, 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 ba. Oh no, it's the mic playing, it's my cable. Ba, ba. Let's try this again. Okay, we're back. I need to sort my cables out here. Ba, ba, ba. Oh, not again. We were doing so well. Maybe if I change back to that first cable will work. Ba. Ba, 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 ba. All right. Another cable. I think it's my USB hub here. Oh. All right. Let's try this. Ba, ba, ba. Cool. So what I was saying is I can use these R vowels to sing just these staccato style notes. Ba, 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 ba. But if I want to juice this arpeggiated line, I can start using E sounds, and then we'll hear that group be active, and you'll see it turn up. Ba, ba, E, 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 ba, 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 E, ba. Maybe those intervals weren't right for the scale I put in. But yeah, that's basically how we can set MIDI effects, but then also go a step further by grouping them up and setting them to vowels. So we have different uses and different sounds based on how we're articulating those ideas. Yeah, so that's a few that I set up there. Hopefully that's given some ideas and various things about using MIDI effects with Doubler. Neo Music said, God's sake, I'm going to delete that. About wind instruments and pitch. So let me delete some of these to save on some CPU. Let's see what we've got here when it comes to wind instruments. We've got brass. Maybe in the library here they'll have some wind instruments. It might not sound very good, but we'll see what we've got. Orchestral Woodwind. Let's go with a flute. Oh, that stayed here. Let's get rid of that. Put this to port 1. Ba, 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 ba. Oh, this might be an octave thing. It's up the octave. Ba, 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 ba. Ah, it's not armed. And it's on channel 10. Put this, MIDI channel 1. Ba, 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 ba. There we go. So, yeah, you said about free pitch. So, basically, you could use it if you want on chromatic, but this is something that we've always said in a lot of our tutorials and videos, that you need an almost impossibly pitch perfect voice to use chromatic mode. So oftentimes if you do use it in chromatic, you're going to get some really crazy MIDI information that's pretty massive. So we have various key lock features in place to kind of keep things tight and sounding melodic. So there's different ways you can use this. You can set them manually. You can use the auto key detect in chromatic to just listen to what you're singing and place you in a key. You can use the note detector if you have an idea. So if I've got ba 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 in my head, but I don't know what notes they are, I can press this. Ba ba ba. So you heard in chromatic there was some different ones, but ba 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 ba. Now I've got that little melody. And there's also suggested scales here, so I can expand this. Ba, 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 ba. So you need to really use key locks when using this to get clean sounding information without mistakes. You mentioned without mistakes. Unfortunately, with chromatic, you're going to get mistakes unless your voice is robotically pitch perfect. So that's the reason for key locks. But yeah, in terms of actually using this though, once we've got this in and once we're in a key lock and we've got our flute sound, for example, then and now we're thinking about our pitch and our input with our voice and how we can change or how we can work with doubler in a way to get the best results. So one of the most important things is that separating notes. People may have heard this before if they're in our other streams, and so sorry if I'm repeating this, but if I've got a 3-note idea, 4 notes, whatever, instead of moving along them like what that is doing is there's pitch in between each of those notes, and that's going to come out in the MIDI information. It's going to become really messy. It would be like, instead of, if I hit the note on a keyboard, instead of just jumping to the next note, I would just be dragging my finger along and all those notes would come out. So instead of going like which is me gliding up and down, I can separate them, be clear, confident, and be like and then they're clear and separate. I use percussive sounds personally at the beginning of the notes because it helps me separate them. This isn't for everyone. There's not a rule on using doubler, but I personally go like ba 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 because it helps me separate things. So that's a tip on using that pitch side of things, is to make sure you're separating them to make sure that it's not going to be messy. And then you can make sure you're really aiming for a note properly. If I go it's hitting all those other notes, but ba 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 ba, and I can play. It's quite loud for me. I'm not sure if that's too loud for you. Maybe I turn this flute down a little bit. Ba 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 ba. It's not a bad sounding flute actually. I thought it would be worse than that. But yeah, so that's a tip for using those things. And that's not to say you're still restricted to staccato style sounds. Like I said, you can still glide between notes, providing that you're in a key lock and stuff. But yeah, make sure you're separating them. Powered is a way to calibrate doubler with your voice because MIDI note goes crazy. So doubler, there's no sort of real calibration required when it comes to pitch. The only thing really that you can change is stickiness and input level. I personally leave them at the default place, and unless you sing in a really extreme way, like really loud or really quiet, I'd recommend just keeping them there. And it's not so much as calibrating as I think it's getting used to doubler and the input. So all those little tips I was talking about, if you got an idea, really being confident and not kind of mumbling. I've not got a great voice. You don't need a really clear, fantastic voice to use this, but you do need to be relatively clear and intentional with the idea. So instead of kind of like slightly mumbly, kind of, really just separating your notes and just being like ba ba, and that's going to make a world of difference in the information you get back. Doubler is just listening for your pitch, and if you're wavering a lot and kind of mumbling, the information you get back is going to be a little bit messy. So maybe I'd recommend keeping the stickiness and input level at the default where they are, so that's about like 3 chords the way up for both of them, and just play around with there until you feel like the response is getting better. Even try a line a few times. So if I've got an idea, might want to repeat it a few times, and let's see what difference it makes and how you can improve it just through the input. So if I'm starting, so I'm getting all these other MIDI notes I don't necessarily want. But if I'm being clear, confident, so there's still occasional little ones at the beginning of notes. So this would just be the uptick, if I go which I'm trying to use percussive notes, but on the whole, what I'm hearing back is what I inputted. So just try have a play around with Dublin, not in a kind of like I'm really trying to nail this idea, but just have a play around with Dublin, get a feel for it, and yeah, hopefully with a bit of practice and just a few goes, you'll start to understand how you can get better response. But if you've got something specific, like particular to you, and it's not quite working, feel free to drop us a line, email to help@voclear.co.uk. I'm always on there as well, and I'm always happy to set up video calls as well. So if you're using it and it's not quite working how you expected, drop me an email on there and we can set up a chat and we can go through it one-on-one. So always happy to do that kind of stuff. So that's a bit of pitch. Just whilst we're on flutes, I actually used this plugin the other day, which I really liked, which I mentioned a bit before, this sample modeling one. And that's really high, let's turn this down. Are new updates coming? Manny Brown says. Yes, we're always working on new things. I've said this before, but we don't like to put timelines on things because we're working with new ground here. We have to test things and later on. But we are always working on the next things, next improvements, next versions, next everything. So yeah, we're working on it, but details to follow once we've cemented them. I'm keeping shum about them for now, but yes, there will be stuff coming in the future. Whilst we're going through flutes, this sample modeling stuff I found was really cool to use with Doubler because it allows real-time shaping. So you can see CC11, it's already mapped the dynamics here. So our envelope dial here, which is the intensity, is already on CC11. And now, so I can get really expressive straight away with that. But it's got so many different controls that you can use things like vibrato intensity. So if I move that, you can hear that the vibrato gets louder. And I can change this. If I learn CC MIDI automation, map this. So now the same thing you saw as you can't see it. Sorry, I didn't realize I'm in the way. No, so let me move this. Now you can see what I'm actually talking about here. These dials here, if I press this, allows you to use different MIDI CC mappings and to change the instrument you're controlling. So this cello, so the dynamics I mentioned here is on CC11 already, and I just mapped this vibrato intensity. So now if I do an R vowel, I get the vibrato coming in, and I can do these more expressive kind of lines. Yeah, so that's quite a fun way. Lots of plugins have these kind of things. I would recommend having a play around with vowels as well to really unlock the kind of the things you can do with Doubler. Sorry, I didn't realize my fat head was covering up everything I was talking about for a while there. All good. But yeah, I guess that's most of the MIDI effects and stuff I had planned for today. I hope there's been some things in this that have been have given you some ideas, and I hope there's some tips and tricks in there, so that are interested to use with Doubler. But yeah, thanks for joining. Like I said, hopefully we can start doing these live streams again soon with a better setup that's not in my bedroom in the office again. I don't think that's too far away now, so the Voclear team should hopefully be back. And next time we might have maybe not just me, and maybe we'll have a proper camera and stuff. But yeah, thanks for joining. As always, if there's any stuff you want to see on our socials, if you need any help, you can always drop stuff in comments. We're always watching them. You can join our forums at forum.vocalo.co.uk. I'm always lurking around on there, so if you've got any questions, post them on there. But yeah, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you guys again soon. Cheers.